Welcome to the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, I'm Frances Hayes, Director of Communications and Public Relations, and your host for today's episode of the Water for Food podcast. I'm joined by Renee San Souci, a member of the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska, an educator, and a poet. She is dedicated to Native youth suicide prevention, language revitalization, community healing, and restoring spiritual connections to the sky and the earth through Native teachings. I caught up with Renee at the Platte River Basin Conference in Kearney, Nebraska, where she's a featured speaker, providing a tribal perspective on creating vibrant, resilient solutions for the future of the people and wildlife who depend on the Platte River. The Platte River runs through Nebraska and is a braided 310-mile-long tributary of the Missouri River, which flows into the Mississippi River, which flows into the Gulf of Mexico. I'm so pleased that you're able to join me, Renee, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from you this morning. So first, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your past, your culture, and what you do, what you're passionate about.
I always introduce myself in Omaha, EA, in the Omaha language. Ebeblete wiblatameke. Omaha, ijaje wiwitate, shonge chube wa'u. Wache ijaje wiwitate, Renee San Souci. Omaha wa'ubre. And I said, let me introduce myself. My Omaha name is Sacred Horsewoman. My English name is Renee San Souci. It's actually French. And I'm an Omaha woman. And, I always introduce myself that way, in the language before I speak about anything. And to give you a background, I'm a member of the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska and Iowa, because our lands extend into Iowa. I currently live in Lincoln, Nebraska. I do work in many different areas, like the ones that you had mentioned, but I also work in environmental justice, socially, conscious work, in helping people to understand the Native perspective on water and Mother Earth.
I've had the pleasure of hearing you talk several times, both here at this conference, but as you've participated in other things, you're very involved and you always wear a lot of different hats and
yes.
Provide that valuable tribal perspective in all of these conversations surrounding water and the Platte River and everything that goes along with that. One of those hats is being an educator.
Yes.
Why is teaching such an important part of your life?
As a child, how people imagine what they're going to be doing. I had originally thought of myself as being an ambassador. And so when I first started at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, I went into political science, and with the intention that I'm going to study international relations. I want to learn about world, politics, and how would someone like myself become involved in that at a level of, I guess, as being a representative of some sort. I didn't imagine myself going into, the public domain, like in Congress or anything like that. My mind was like, I'm going to go and I want to represent, the people and go to other countries. Well, in my mind, that was, what I wanted to do. But then once I really thought about it, and I thought, that doesn't seem right. I don't like the United States policies. And especially when the federal Indian policies that they had enacted upon all the tribes here in, across the United States, Canada, and throughout Turtle Island. I realized that this wasn't going to be my area. Well, over the years, once I became an educator, I went through a program called, originally it was called the Career Ladder Project, and it was for the development of Native teachers to be in Native schools, primarily. And I got my degree, my education degree, my teaching degree. And the objective in that program was that we were to immerse ourselves in our tribal history, culture, language, etc., etc. And I did, I fully embraced that. For the first time, I was able to fully immerse myself because now I could do it, and with supports. I didn't, without having to go out and work and do all the other things that normally would not have allowed me to do that. But once I did, I realized, yes, this is me. This is my identity, as well as, my tribe and Native people and so on and so forth. So originally my thought was, I'm going to be an educator and serve in the school on my reservation and serve Omaha children and families and the community. And so I had these big dreams of being a teacher. But again, reality hit me, and I think it was after they enacted No Child Left Behind, and that restricted, so much of the culture and language that we could be teaching in the school system. It really changed, again, my direction. Because, I went to work for the Nebraska Department of Education right after I graduated. And I could not have predicted that, everything that I learned through that experience would then lead me into other areas of my life. So it was an eye-opener for me. They invested a lot in my training, and I'm very grateful for that. But on the other hand, they had no idea how to work with Native people. And I was like one of the first Natives that they had brought into their area, to their field, their department, et cetera, and they had no idea how to work with me. So again, it was like, it became problematic, and I realized that, wow, they are making so many mistakes, in regards to how to work with Native people. And I realized then, after I left the Nebraska Department of Ed, that I am not going to become a public school teacher because I don't envision myself teaching in the way that the public school system wants us to teach. I had all this training how to teach with Native methods, educational methods. And I had, over those years, I had gotten to see all of these Native schools that were implementing their own curriculum in their languages, in all subjects. And I thought that could happen here in Nebraska. And it's taken a while for that to begin to happen. And it still hasn't been to that level that it could be. And in the research that we had done as educators over language and culture and the impacts upon education, one of the things that was very clear in the research that we read, all the articles, was that when a child knows their native language, and that's so much a part of their identity, and then they learn all the subjects in their language, it gives the children more power to see that they have that ability to learn everything. And it can be done in a way that will benefit them throughout their lives. So most people think of bilingual education, but English is always spoken first, and then whatever language they're going to be. In an immersive setting, the native language is spoken all the time, and there will be no English at all. Because the reality is that we are surrounded in an English setting. This is like we all speak the Queen's English or the King's English, as I always point that out to people. We've all been through that process already. So for us to bring our languages back because of what had happened to us systematically over the generations of how we got to this point of not being able to speak our own languages anymore. It's a shift in thinking. Meaning that we're going to decolonize and begin that process of thinking in our languages and thinking about our way of life first before English or an American system, way of life. So for me, that's what shifted, and I wanted to focus on that. So that's what I've spent years continuing to research, but also to consult with people. And I realized that my first dream of being an ambassador came true, because then I became an ambassador for my tribe or for Native people, and in helping organizations or schools or anyone who comes and says, how do I work with Native people? And so that's when they consult with me. And then we set up a plan, of how we're going to figure that out. And then I can utilize all my skills that I've gained over the years.
Thank you for that. I don't think I ever knew your full background of all the learning that you've had, and it's kind of interesting how it's come full circle, even though it's taken a bit of a winding road. So, and I think it's very important what you do, because the way we speak, as you've just expressed, is so important, and it is a major way in which we break down barriers and we have those conversations,
yes,
even if they're difficult. So,
one thing I want to point out about languages very quickly is that when you're learning English is, as we would say in a linguistic term, is a finite language, and it renders everything dead, to put it that way. And, it becomes really about a way of thinking and how you see the world. But in a native language, most native languages are verb-centered. So they're very action. Everything is alive. Everything. And that goes with our philosophy and belief system, that, when we say all my relations, we're talking about everything in the universe, and that we're acknowledging relationship to everything all around us, to all the plants, to the animals, to all the elements, to all human beings, but to everything else out in the universe, to the stars and other planets that exist out there, and everything that you could think of. So it's on I would say, not just on an international level, but, a stellar level. And that's how our languages work. But with English, it's like, when we say it's finite, it's a noun-based language. And therefore, they have a the people that work in science fields, when they're working with English or any of the European languages, oftentimes what they're faced with is just in trying to interpret data that then doesn't work within the language system. But when they come to Native people and then they apply the same formulas in our language or languages, then it becomes alive in there. And that's been noted as well, researched, that our languages allow for that kind of thinking. So, and people don't realize that either. So for me, it helped me also to realize that not only am I just advocating for languages and understanding of our languages and how they work, but I'm also thinking in a scientific way that there's many solutions that haven't even been sought out through the native language process.
That's incredibly interesting.
Yes.
So this is the Water for Food podcast, and
yes,
here we are at a conference focused on water. Can you share with us a bit more about tribal perspectives when it comes to water and the importance of water
yes,
in those native?
For someone like myself, once again, I always like to differentiate between, there's many different viewpoints here, as we know, that are involved with any kind of water conference or environmental conference. My area is usually in environmental justice or injustice. That in working with water, I've been trained how to work with water on a spiritual level, on a ceremonial level. And my interest with, about water began, when I was a child again. And looking back, when I think about it, I was like, well, I began to think about water in a way that now, this is how I teach my kids to think about water, because I didn't have the, I guess you'd say, support system, whether that was in school or in the community or in my family, to understand that, oh wow, she's really interested in that. We should, well, because my parents were busy. They were busy working all the time and trying to, support a family. These things didn't occur to them at the time. There were other things happening at the time. So, what was going on then, they couldn't have, I guess, thought it through because they didn't have time to. We were too busy trying to survive. But what that meant was that over the years, I continued to have this interest, and I wanted to understand, what happened to us? How did this happen? How did water come to be the way it is now? How does it come through the faucet? So I had all these questions. And again, I would read books, and then, I would study things, and then I would okay, I don't know how to break into anything, into any of the processes that, that would be educational-wise back then. Back then when I was growing up, and I didn't finish high school because I left high school when I was in the 11th grade. And I realized one day I came home and I just said to my mom, I'm not going back there. And she said, well, why not? And I said, well, they don't teach anything that applies to me. So in other words, there was no relevancy to how I thought and did things as a Native student. And so that's where they lost me. But it wasn't that I never saw myself as, I never saw myself as not being intelligent. I knew I was, but I just didn't find a way to how to bring that out, or how do I tap into these sources that will help me to learn more. And there was a question I asked in my presentation that we did in the social policy and education strand. And that question was, how many Native women do you see in the STEM fields? None, very rarely do you see women in those fields. I knew I wanted to go into STEM, or actually STEAM, because you're throwing in art as well. And I just didn't have the process. There was no bridge there to help me figure that out. And again, nobody knew how to work with Native students. So this is something over the years that I had to come to an understanding. And when I went through my educational program, again, as a teacher, then I began to see all the possibilities. As a child, I would have preferred to learn in my language, and then I could have studied and learned about water. But not just that, the scientific approach, especially a Western scientific approach. I preferred our natural way of, our views of Mother Earth and how we interact with water as an ancient being, not just as something that's I guess that would meet supply and demand, and that has an economic value. That's not how I thought. I wanted to actually learn, how do we interrelate with water? But there was no system in place for me to do that. So I had to go step by step, and I guess you would say walk through what my ancestors had learned, because that was what I was learning in my teaching program, and what I learned afterward, that there were these processes that had been in place for millennia, that we had this knowledge to draw on, Native people. But in that great disruption, when I talk about the great disruption, that is, from the time of colonization of this land, when that occurred, then the disruption occurred in our traditional ecological knowledge. Our educational practices had been disrupted, from that time on. And we're just now becoming, we're just now regaining that sense, because many of our tribes, our people, want that way of life back. So we often seek out the larger tribes that were able to maintain their traditional ecological knowledge, because they took it underground. And they maintained it in secrecy for a long time. And if you know anything about the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978, what that act had done was it freed us up, Native people, to be able to practice our ceremonial life ways without fear of being imprisoned. Because up to 1978, it was illegal, our practices. So for me, I realized that's why I didn't see anything. That's why I couldn't make these connections as a young person, as a child, because our ways of thinking and ways of life were outlawed. For me, my journey began in the 80s, when after this act freed everybody up. That's when I began to see all the ceremonies and hear about them, and I wanted to learn about them. But it was a gradual process. Nothing happened overnight. Everything took time. It took years until, I found my way to the Ojibwe people to learn more about my own tribe. And when I made that connection and then learned about the ceremonies that they maintained, which my tribe had once practiced up until 1958, then I said, okay, I can do this now. But that didn't happen until 2007, and by that time I was, about 45, 46, and I turned 60 this year. I'm talking about 55 years that it's taken me to get to this place before I had to work through every single barrier that was there, that existed, and which still exists. Those barriers still exist today. But for me, being the ambassador that I became, in knocking those barriers down and saying, you know what, that's no longer allowable. You're not going to keep us out of these fields, or, you're not going to silence us. We're here. We always say this. We are here, we are strong, and here we shall remain. We've always been here, and, we're still here, and we're going to continue to be here.
I think that relates well to one of my other questions, which is, in all your years of work in this area and what you've learned throughout your lifetime, what have been some of the biggest successes that you've seen? What are you most proud of that has been accomplished over the years?
That's a good question. I never thought about that in that way. Because one thing that we're always taught in our way of thinking is that we have to constantly be humble, no matter where we go. And I don't put it that way, I guess. I let the people do that. If my mom were alive today, she would be saying, yes, I'm proud of my daughter. And she would be the one doing everything, pushing for, we're going to do this, But I would say now, the way I look at it, if I'm going to be looking at myself as accomplished, I would look at my children. Was I successful in transferring the knowledge that I have to them? Are they able to carry on, and in a way that will help them, in dealing with the world that we live in? Because this is a very violent world. And I wanted to teach them they don't have to deal with all of the things that I dealt with. I'm trying to make this, break that ground for them so that it's a little bit easier for them to go in whatever direction they want to. I have 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. Both my daughters are artists and are practicing artists. I feel that for any young person, especially a young person of color, whether they're going in, they're in high school or college or whatever field they're going into, that they always recognize that the system that has been designed here all around us isn't our system. It's a system designed to serve people who are, of European heritage. And such a system that we're, continually battling for respect and so on and so forth, acknowledgement, and it gets tiring, And you said, I wear many hats. And that's true. I see myself as a person who is centered. So if I look at myself and there's a big circle, let's say, and in this circle I'm at the center. When I'm in the center, then whatever I'm doing, it's like a spoke, or energy, and it's going in, throughout the circle. It all leads to me. But all of these spokes that I have in my circle is all the work. At the core is myself and my core beliefs and spirituality. And then all the work that I'm doing in all of these areas, then, it comes from that core. And this is what I've taught people. I said, when you're trying to balance everything out, this is how you can look at, and see yourself. A good example I use is, how those plasma balls look and how that centerpiece comes up and then, the electricity shoots back and forth. That's how I see myself. So it's dynamic, it's alive, but I'm still at the center and with the core.
I love hearing you talk about your kids because you're very clearly proud of them.
Yes. They're my pride and joy. So if anything, my accomplishment is, that I've had children and then I've done my best to help them. So that would be my main proud moment, I guess you'd say.
So what are some takeaways that you hope those attending this conference, especially regarding your talk?
Well, I hope that the people that are participating will come away with an understanding that there's certainly much more room, for building relationships, but also to build understanding. And that to relate, into the work that they're doing, that they need to have a change of thought as to how they see water. That it's not just an economic force that, and that's clearly what I've heard here, that water is seen as, like supply and demand, and that it has a price per gallon, or, how people are utilizing water in their fields and so forth, per acre and so on. And they put a price to everything. And actually, water is priceless. It should not be seen in that light. It's not resource. It's the source of life. And when you look at it from that way, then you have a whole different relationship to water. That water is a living entity, that it's been here billions of years for so long. And, this is the water that we are drinking, that is an ancient being, and it keeps us alive. We cannot live without water. But can water live without us? Yes. And we know that, Mother Earth can do very well without us. Animals don't need us. The plants don't need us. But we need them to live here.
Is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you would like to comment on?
Well, in this work that I do, it's not something, like I said, that I just didn't decide to do it. These were always, like I said, ideas that I had as a child, but didn't have the way to articulate, what my passions were, or a process to help me engage, like I said, because when you're going through a system that doesn't recognize you, for one, I pretty much felt like I was invisible going through school. And if I did have something to say, people would always scoff or make fun of me when I would speak out. But over the years, as I've gathered, like I said, all my experiences, my life experiences, as well as everything that I've learned, and then been able to channel my voice, the spiritual practices have definitely helped me. All these years that I've had to go through my sacrifices in order to learn. Like, just like what I said when I was addressing everybody after the water ceremony, and I said, if you had the same love and passion that we do as Native people for Mother Earth, for the water, then we would see huge changes here. The level of commitment I'm talking about is a lifelong commitment, and it's a 24/7 commitment. It's not something I could ever put down, and it's not my 8 to 5 job or anything like that. This is like a lifelong commitment I've made, and it comes from a spiritual basis. So for me, it's about not only educating people and helping them, but it's about now having a voice. When we're committed to helping, and our responsibility is to, take care of water, for instance, then that is a voice that we need to bring to the table, so to speak. So for me now that my children, all my children are grown pretty much, and now it allows me, frees up my time, because now, before I was a full-time single mother raising 4 children. And now I'm like, okay, my kids are grown. Wow, where did the time go? Wow, what happened? But now it frees me up so I can travel and do, participate in panel discussions and bring that voice to light, especially here in Nebraska.
That's all that I have for us today, but it's been really insightful for me personally, and hopefully our listeners, it's been insightful for them too, just awesome. To hear you talk and be able to take your knowledge beyond these walls, but also to our listeners around the world. So thank you so much for that.
Yes. I had one person yesterday ask me, he said, where do you see yourself in 3 years? And I was like, oh my goodness. I said, well, I'm going to be international. I'll be global, in that time. It's coming.
Well, I look forward to seeing how the next 3 years go and how that journey manifests. And thank you for sharing your perspective today and your important voice in ensuring that we take care of this world that we live in and beyond, especially for future generations.
Thanks for joining us this time on the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.